I got up before 5 this morning to prepare for this show and do my blog, and I flicked through maybe 6 newspapers, 4 news blogs, aggregator sites like Drudge and Instapundit. Readers also sent me dozens of links to news tips, and I did all that on the internet before a single physical newspaper hit my lawn. The internet is giving us news quicker, but at the same time, it's actually killing newspapers by giving away news for free and stealing advertising. Now, few newspaper companies have felt that pain more than Fairfax, which publishes The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Those 2 newspapers alone lost a third of their staff in 5 years. Many smaller Fairfax newspapers have closed. And all this is documented by award-winning journalist, now author, Ben Hills, in his new book, Stop the Presses: How Greed, Incompetence and the Internet Wrecked Fairfax. Ben, thanks for joining me.
Morning, Andrew.
How did the internet hurt Fairfax?
It's not so much the circulation. Fairfax people will tell you that they've got more readers now, including their online readers, than at any time in their history. Something like 5 million people read those papers. It's not the readers, it's the revenue. For a couple of 100 years, Fairfax papers have really dominated the media landscape, thanks to what Rupert Murdoch called the rivers of gold. The revenues brought in by their classified advertising mainly. And that's what the internet has destroyed. The internet is a much quicker, a much cheaper, a much more convenient, a much more searchable method of people locating their cars, locating the houses that they want to be, looking for jobs. And that's what's really caused the trouble at Fairfax. Their revenues have been destroyed by the internet.
Well, one of the most remarkable parts of your book is showing how Fairfax could have bought 3 of the websites that eventually helped destroy their advertising income. That's the ads for the cars, the real estate and the jobs. Now, are you being wise only in hindsight?
Oh, no, not at all. Look, 15 years ago when there are 3 main competitors. There's Seek for employment, carsales.com for cars, and realestate.com for houses. Now, 15 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago, those 3 companies were startups. They were all in serious financial trouble. And they approached Fairfax to see if Fairfax wanted to invest in them. And on each occasion, Fairfax either didn't pursue the talks or, for whatever reason, failed to consummate a deal. Now, it's not the wisdom of hindsight, because at the same time as Fairfax was humming and hawing about whether or not it would get into these online markets, both Lachlan Murdoch and James Packer pricked their ears up and jumped in, and as a result made hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. I mean, realestate.com, which is now the News Corporation real estate site, alone is twice the size of Fairfax now. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, and Fairfax could have got in on the ground floor and just missed the opportunity.
Well, you also note how the Fairfax boards recently haven't had people on them who know anything about their product, which is newspapers, even seem to take pride in not interfering with the very thing they need to sell. And what makes it more astonishing is that the board only represents, in personal holdings, 1% of the stock of the company. Now, are newspapers best run by people who actually own and love them, like, in our case, in News Limited's case, Rupert Murdoch?
Look, I'm not necessarily in love with moguls. You have to, perhaps read the Leveson inquiry to see that they can occasionally trip over. The problem with Fairfax has been not so much that they didn't love newspapers, but that they had no knowledge of newspapers. Since the company came out of receivership 25-odd years ago, they've had a procession of directors and chief executives with no experience whatsoever. I mean, they've had people with experience in fast food franchising, in merchant banking, they've had the odd lawyer, they've had management consultants. They've had everybody except anybody with any knowledge of the media, and I'm sure that's at the bottom of the troubles that they face and the reason why they failed to take up the challenge of the internet successfully.
One of the big debates, Ben, is whether print newspapers will disappear. Now, Fairfax, it denies it, but it seems to have planned for their newspapers to be shifted entirely online. That's the impression it's certainly given. Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation says newspapers will in fact still be there for a long time to come. What's your best guess?
Look, what we're talking about here is two bold men fighting over a comb, this dispute between Fairfax and Murdoch. Everybody who hasn't been in a cupboard for the last 10 years knows that sooner or later print newspapers are finished. You know, they're just as dead as the horse and cart when the automobile came along. It's a transition, it's inevitable. All we're really talking about now is when it will happen. Greg Highwood, the chief executive at Fairfax, says it could be 3 or 5 or perhaps 10 years. And Rupert Murdoch in the past has also said that he recognises that sooner or later print is finished. What the battle is all about is who gets to squeeze the last few drops of revenue from print newspapers. And my betting is that just as in the 1980s, when we last had a great tabloid circulation war in Sydney, it's going to be Murdoch that finishes up in front. Fairfax is going to transit, I think, to online only, or perhaps retaining a weekend edition, and it's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 years, is my bet.
Does it matter if printed newspapers disappear?
Look, it matters in this sense, Andrew, that printed newspapers like The Age, Sydney Morning Herald and the other papers in the Fairfax stable have been a complete service, a news service and a public record, if you like. They've covered everything from sport to Canberra politics to state politics to lifestyle, police rounds. I mean, they've been full-service newspapers. If you look at any of the online offerings, they're not. And the reason for that is that the revenues online just won't support those huge newsrooms that we've had in the past, with 300 or 400 journalists working there. A rough guess is that for every $1 in print advertising that newspapers are losing, they're only gaining 10 cents. 10 cents in online advertising.
Oh, Ben, and that will not sustain the average journalist's expense account.
It won't.
No, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.